Then there's a second view of happiness, which is the one, of course, everyone's going to recognize in the American culture, right? I mean, this is what we call ego-comparative happiness. So this kind of happiness comes when I get an ego boost, and the ego boost will come when I get a comparative advantage. So this kind of a person's constantly looking around who's, more intelligent, who's less intelligent, who's more successful, less successful, got more status, less status, who's winning, who's losing, who's achieving more, who's achieving less, who's got more power, less power, more control, less control. But it's all about more or less in a series of comparative aspects. So when you get to 80 years old, you can say, I was smarter than all these other poor saps, and I was more athletic, that wouldn't be me, than all these other poor saps, but for all intents and purposes, right, at the end of the day, all you can say is, I was better than people, but there's nothing else there. I mean, it is absolutely vacuous, yeah. So, Latin, by the way, has 4 Latin names for each of these kinds of happiness, and you can sort of see them as you're going through Augustine's Confessions, right? That when he's really talking about that pleasure, happiness, the linguini, right? The pairs, as it were. He's talking about laetus, L-A-E-T-U-S. And then when you get up to the ego comparative, and by the way, Augustine was an expert at ego comparative happiness. Nothing he liked better than mopping the floor with the debate competition and winning, because he was such a winner. And that's called Felix, F-E-L-I-X. So Felix, the cat. It dates myself. And then the third level of happiness is called beatitudo, or beatus. And you'll recognize that, beatitudo, the Beatitudes, right? And that's the kind of happiness that comes from contributing to somebody else, making a positive difference to somebody or something beyond myself. So ego-comparative happiness is always pointing to me. I'm the winner, I'm the smartest, I'm the whatever. But when you talk about contributive happiness, right, or level 3 happiness, beatitudo, you're really talking about investing yourself in somebody or something beyond yourself. Something you want to make a positive difference to family, to friends, to country, to God, to your church, to the kingdom of God, right, to your community, right, to your organization, your institution. You're looking for ways that you can make an optimal positive difference to the world before you leave. So nobody wants to get to 80 years old and go, hey, what was the difference between the value of my life and that of a rock? And have to say, well, the rock probably did more. I was a net negative, right? So essentially, we begin to realize, that ego-comparative happiness is empty. And we feel emptiness, by the way, when we have no contributor. If we feel like we do nothing for anyone, that our life makes no meaningful difference to the world around me, you feel a terrible sense of alienation, emptiness within. But then there's a fourth kind of happiness. And that fourth kind of happiness, as you would suspect, is transcendent happiness, because we're built for it. I mean, God, really has built us. If you take a look at chapter 2 of this book, where I talk about transcendent happiness, there's an inward communication. As this theologian a long time ago, Rudolf Otto, wrote a book called The Numinous Experience, kind of a universal, kind of phenomenon that he went out and sort of measured in various cultures and religions throughout history, and said, why up to about 100 years ago, were about 95% of people around the world religious. And of course, he finally gets down to this interior experience of what he calls a mysterium tremendum, or, this idea of, a sense of God within, which is both fascinating and inviting, yet mysterious and overpowering, but it leads to what, Mircea Eliade would call the sacred. But anyway, the idea is we're built for it. And not only that, but St. Augustine, following Plato, he said, we've got these 5 transcendental desires. We desire perfect truth, perfect love, perfect goodness or fairness, perfect beauty, and perfect home. And where did we get that from?
Right.
And of course, you have to get it from God, but that's a proof.
Could I just maybe step in
fire away,
and suggest that you've left out a form of happiness, a kind of fifth wheel. And it's what I'm having an experience of right now. When the guest corners the market on the conversation, and I don't have to say anything. I can leave early and have some of that linguine.